Imagine buying a first-class ticket, preparing for an important flight, only to be forced into the back of the plane not because of a mistake, but because of the color of your skin. Celeste Ramsey, a brilliant tech CEO, faced this exact humiliation. In the cramped economy seat, watched coldly by flight attendants and overlooked by gate agents, she felt the sting of invisible barriers despite her success and dignity. But what if one woman's quiet strength and deep resilience could shake an entire airline industry? What if the device in her hand, the very smartphone meant for connection, became the catalyst for a powerful act of justice? How far would you go to reclaim the seat and respect you earned? And what happens when a single truth is broadcasted not just across a cabin, but to the world? This story unfolds entirely on a plane, but it carries the weight of a nation's struggle with discrimination, courage, and change. It's not just about one seat. It's about systemic bias, resilience, and the fight for dignity. If you believe no one should ever be denied their rightful place, hit like, share this story, and subscribe to hear more tales of courage fighting injustice. Now, let's dive into Celeste's journey. The line at Gate 14 of JFK Airport moved slowly, punctuated by the mechanical beeps of boarding passes scanning and the occasional murmur of polite conversation. Celeste Ramsey stood tall, dressed in a navy blue pantsuit tailored just enough to feel both comfortable and commanding. Her sleek suitcase rolled quietly behind her, and her passport and phone were ready in her hand. This was routine. She had boarded more flights in the last 6 months than she could count. But this one mattered. Across the Atlantic, in a historic lecture hall at Imperial Medical Institute in London, a room full of global health leaders would soon hear her speak. Celeste had been invited to present the findings of her team's neural mapping project, a breakthrough in Alzheimer's treatment. Years of work had led to this moment, but none of that was visible to the gate agent scanning boarding passes at the front of the line. Celeste stepped forward when her turn came. She extended her phone with the QR code bright on the screen. The gate agent, a woman in her 50s with a clipped tone and a name tag that read Diane Mercer, didn't smile. "One moment, please. I'm seeing a note on your reservation." Celeste raised an eyebrow, but her voice remained calm. "Is there a problem with my first-class ticket?" Diane looked at her, then back to the screen. "This ticket is reading as unconfirmed. Do you have another form of confirmation?" Celeste tapped her phone and immediately pulled up the confirmation email from Sterling Air. The screen displayed her full itinerary, clearly showing first class, seat 2A, JFK to LHR. She handed it over without a word. Diane stared at the screen for several seconds longer than necessary. Then she looked up again. "I'll need to call a supervisor." Behind Celeste, the line began to slow. People shifted, annoyed. She could feel the stares begin, not just impatient ones, but assessing, measuring, questioning. She glanced at the man behind her, a white executive in a Patagonia vest. He looked at her boarding pass with something between curiosity and doubt. Celeste said nothing. Another man walked up to Diane's side. He wore a pressed white shirt and an earpiece. Thomas Kellen, supervisor, his name tag read. He greeted Diane in a low voice, glanced at Celeste, and then leaned over the monitor. "This happens sometimes with system sync errors," he said. "We just want to be thorough. Please step aside while we verify." "I'd rather not step aside," Celeste said quietly. "My flight board's in 10 minutes. This is my seat. I have documentation. What exactly are you verifying? Thomas stiffened slightly. Just need to ensure the seat wasn't reassigned. You understand. Protocol. Celeste was aware, acutely, that the 3 white passengers behind her had already boarded, barely showing their phones. No verification needed. No additional scrutiny. Her jaw tightened, but she kept her tone neutral. Then verify it quickly. She said, "I'm not moving unless necessary." Thomas conferred with Diane again. Celeste heard a few mumbled terms: code mismatch, reallocation flag, upgrade protocol. The usual gibberish that often masked something deeper. She had worked in tech long enough to know what a system error looked like, and this wasn't it. After several tense minutes, Thomas handed her a paper slip. "We've placed you in a temporary seat in economy while we investigate row 31B. We'll notify the flight crew if any changes occur mid-flight." Celeste looked at the slip, then back at him. "This seat was purchased 3 weeks ago. Paid in full with my corporate card. First class, seat 2A. Thomas gave a tired, performative smile. "Just temporary." "Thank you for understanding." She didn't respond. She picked up her bag, stepped aside, and walked toward the economy boarding line. Behind her, the murmurs had grown. One woman whispered something that sounded like, "Why didn't she just buy the right ticket?" Another man muttered, "Probably some upgrade glitch." Celeste had heard them all before. As she passed the curtain dividing the 2 cabins, her eyes caught a glimpse of Seat 2A empty, plush, waiting. She clenched her fingers around the boarding slip, not out of anger, not even frustration. It was something colder now, something settled, focused. The economy cabin buzzed with noise, people squeezing bags into overhead bins, kids crying, flight attendants managing chaos with plastic smiles. She found row 31B, a middle seat wedged between a man who had already claimed both armrests and a teenager slouching into the aisle. Celeste sat, placed her bag under the seat, and exhaled slowly. The man next to her turned, his voice too loud. "Didn't expect to see someone dressed like that back here. Big meeting." She gave him a short nod. "Yes, medical conference in London." He nodded, satisfied, then returned to scrolling through his phone. Celeste leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Her shoulders ached, not from tension but from weight. The weight of always having to smile, to justify, to stand taller, to speak softer, to walk that tightrope between dignity and discomfort. Her phone buzzed, a message from her assistant. "Good luck, boss. The world's gonna remember your name tomorrow." Celeste smiled faintly. Maybe, but tonight, it would remember how quickly a name, a title, and a legacy could be dismissed the moment someone behind a screen decided she didn't fit the picture they expected. She tapped open her code editor. Some systems need more than a patch. Some need to be rewritten entirely. The seatbelt light had just flickered off when Celeste Ramsey opened her eyes again. The cabin was already settling into the long lull of a transatlantic flight. The whir of air vents, the soft chime of flight announcements, the occasional cough or rustle of a snack bag had all hummed around her in a muffled gray. But inside, her thoughts were sharp. She had spent the first 30 minutes of the flight staring at the tray table in front of her, trying to decide whether to let it go, whether it was worth carrying this yet again. The questions always came in the same order. Was this really discrimination? Could this have just been a misunderstanding? Would people believe her? Did she even want them to? Her fingers brushed the edge of her phone in her lap. A part of her wished she could silence the thoughts. Just sleep, just rest. But that part was drowned out by another voice. The quiet, constant one that had been with her since she was a little girl watching her mother get passed over for a job she was more qualified for. That voice whispered, "You know what this is." The cart clinked down the aisle. A flight attendant stopped at her row, blonde, well-groomed, with a polished smile that vanished the second she turned to Celeste. "Drink." Her voice was flat, not rude, just void. Celeste looked at the options on the cart. She recognized her instantly. Marissa Dane, one of the lead attendants. She had seen her warmly greet every first-class passenger as they boarded. There had been glasses of champagne, tailored welcomes, genuine warmth. Now she stood over Celeste as if she were handing out crumbs. "What are my options?" Marissa sighed softly through her nose, as if the question were a personal inconvenience. "Water, orange juice, ginger ale." Celeste paused. "I'll take sparkling water, please." Marissa handed it to her without a word, turned to the man in the aisle seat, and suddenly her voice lifted. "We also have beer, wine, or scotch if you're interested, sir." He chuckled and chose the wine. Celeste took a long sip of her water, suddenly parched. She did not expect kindness, but the blatant contrast in tone made her chest tighten. She pulled her laptop from her bag. If she couldn't rest, she would work. The file she opened was titled Event Trigger Module, the prototype interface for NeuralVault's newest AI-driven firewall, a system designed to protect hospitals, labs, and infrastructure from digital intrusion. She had helped build it line by line. It could isolate threats, shut down access, and restart systems without leaving a trace. It had been designed for defense, but every system could be inverted. Celeste began reviewing her custom functions. Her fingers moved over the keyboard with the ease of fluency, the same way a pianist returns to scales or a dancer to rehearsal. She was not angry. Anger was reactive. What she felt was something deeper, focused, strategic. She was not seeking revenge. She was preparing a mirror, the kind that made systems see themselves. And this airline would have no choice but to look. Halfway through reviewing her logic strings, Celeste felt a shadow in the aisle. She glanced up. Thomas Kellen, the supervisor from the gate, stood beside her seat, an apologetic smile on his face. "Ms. Ramsey," he said softly, "do you have a moment?" Celeste blinked. "You're on the flight." "Yes," he said. "We often travel on company flights to monitor service standards. I was upgraded last minute." Of course you were, she thought. He crouched slightly to speak at eye level, voice low. "I wanted to follow up on earlier. We've reviewed the boarding data, and it looks like there may have been a glitch after all. Your seat had a duplicate reservation assigned in error. It has since been corrected." Celeste stared at him, her face unreadable. "That's unfortunate," she said, "especially since I was removed from the first-class list without being notified or offered alternatives." "I understand," he replied, still smiling, "and I want to apologize for that. It wasn't our intention to cause any offense." She tilted her head slightly. "Tell me, Mr. Kellen, when you scanned my boarding pass, what made you pause?" His smile twitched. "As I said, the system flagged it as needing verification. And did it flag the man who boarded before me? I didn't handle his check-in." Celeste nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. Thomas shifted, then glanced around. "Listen, Ms. Ramsey, we've taken note of the incident. I assure you, we're committed to fairness and equity across all levels of service. I hope this won't impact your view of Sterling Air." She looked down at her laptop screen. "Already has." He hesitated. "Is there anything I can do to make this right?" She closed the lid of her laptop and looked at him directly. "Yes. Sit down. Excuse me. Take the empty seat beside me. I want to tell you what it feels like to carry this your whole life." He blinked, caught off guard. She gestured again. "Sit." He obeyed. For the next 10 minutes, Celeste spoke with quiet intensity about being questioned in luxury stores, about having to carry more degrees than her white peers to be considered competent, about being assumed to be the assistant when she was the founder. She did not raise her voice, she did not cry, she simply stated facts. When she was done, Thomas stared ahead, his jaw clenched. "I had no idea," he finally said. "That's the problem." He nodded, stood, and returned to the front of the plane without another word. Celeste reopened her laptop and whispered to herself, "No one ever does." The plane dipped slightly as they crossed the Atlantic. Lights dimmed. A child cried somewhere in the back rows. People adjusted pillows, reclined, and vanished into sleep. Celeste remained awake. She coded in silence. The module now had a timer, a test sequence, a countdown. Just 3 minutes, enough to confuse, to disrupt, not enough to harm. She ran a simulation, 12 planes, 3 minutes each, no damage, just noise, just enough to make the invisible visible, just enough to say, "We are here, and we are watching." And suddenly, a quiet thought crossed her mind, more memory than voice. It was her grandmother's phrase, whispered during storms. "They only notice you when you shake the sky." Celeste clicked save, and the sky was almost ready. The hum of the engines was steady, comforting, even, if you were the kind of person who could fall asleep mid-air. Celeste Ramsey was not that kind of person. She had always preferred to stay alert on planes. Too many years of red-eye flights to pitch rooms, too many layovers with barely time to breathe, too many trips where everything depended on her being sharp the moment she landed. She had learned to function on 2 hours of rest and a whisper of caffeine. What she had not learned, no matter how many frequent flyer miles she accumulated, was how to get used to the curtain. The curtain was thin, almost meaningless in physical terms, just a bit of fabric strung between two classes of the same aircraft. But emotionally, symbolically, it was a wall, one she had crossed many times, one she had earned the right to cross, and one they had quietly, smoothly, pushed her back behind today. Row 31 was 3 seats across, wedged so tightly it was impossible not to bump knees and elbows. Celeste was in the middle. On her left, the teenage boy had slipped on headphones and slouched into his hoodie, half asleep already. On her right, the businessman with wide shoulders and an overconfident cologne leaned toward the aisle, scrolling through sports scores. Neither spoke to her again. They had filed her away as a quiet woman in a tailored suit, working on something important, but probably not important enough. She stared straight ahead, her screen blank. The in-flight entertainment system was frozen. It had been for over 30 minutes now. The flight attendant had apologized briefly, promising it would reset, but no one came back to check. Celeste didn't need the distraction. Her thoughts were noisier than any film could be. She was replaying the moment Diane Mercer had narrowed her eyes at her boarding pass. The moment Thomas Kellen had softened his voice and still forced her to move. The way Marissa Dane's entire posture had shifted when she realized who was sitting in the back row. But worst of all was the moment no one else had spoken. No passenger questioned what happened. No one said, "Hey, she was ahead of me in line." No one asked, "Why did she get moved?" No ally, no stranger, no voice of interruption. That was the most exhausting part. The silence. She reached for her water again and took a small sip. Her hand trembled slightly. She paused, looking at it, surprised by her own body. She was not afraid, not angry, but something inside her was vibrating. The overhead light above her flickered once. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. For a brief moment, a memory returned. She was 16. In her high school chemistry lab, the teacher had asked a question about carbon isotopes. Celeste had raised her hand. The teacher looked past her, called on the boy next to her instead. When he fumbled the answer, the teacher turned back to her, surprised when she recited the explanation perfectly. After class, he had said, "You're sharper than you look." She remembered the way that phrase settled in her chest like a weight, the way she went home and opened her textbooks like they were shields. It had always been this way, and she had always pushed through it. But pushing through did not mean forgetting. She opened her eyes again and stared at the curtain. It fluttered slightly each time someone moved beyond it. The soft swish was rhythmic, taunting. She imagined what was happening behind it. Champagne flutes, warm towels, comfortable recline, and Marissa Dane, offering options with a practiced smile. There was a sound to her left, a rustle. Celeste turned and noticed a young girl walking down the aisle. She was maybe 8 or 9, brown skin, bright eyes. She stopped beside Celeste's row and peeked through the curtain. Celeste watched quietly. Marissa noticed her almost immediately and stepped forward. "Sweetheart, you can't be here. Go back to your seat, please." The girl didn't move. "I just wanted to see what it looks like," she said. Marissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "This area's for first class only. Darling, go back to your seat now." The girl turned, looking slightly embarrassed, and walked back down the aisle. Celeste caught her eye briefly. She offered the smallest smile, a gentle nod. The girl hesitated, then smiled back. That moment stayed with Celeste longer than she expected, because she knew what the girl saw, not just a curtain, but a message. You do not belong here. Celeste looked down at her laptop again. The screen reflected the blinking code from earlier. She had paused her work, not because she doubted what she was doing, but because she had hoped someone else would act, hoped that just once the system would correct itself without her intervention. But hope, she was learning, had a time limit. She reopened the interface and tapped on the modules. The test sequences were complete. 12 planes, 12 endpoints, 3 minutes of silent disruption per endpoint, no damage, no trace. She had written the code to be graceful, elegant, like a whisper against a window pane. She thought of it now, not as an attack, but as a pulse, a reminder, a refusal to disappear. Her cursor hovered over the activate test function, not for the real operation, just the simulation. Still, she hesitated. She remembered what her CTO had once said to her, after they launched their first neural patching system. "Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should," Celeste whispered to herself. "But sometimes we should." She clicked Run Test. Nothing happened on her screen, but in her mind, she saw it unfold. 12 planes, a short blackout, flight attendants scrambling, passengers tweeting, executives noticing, and maybe, finally, someone asking the right question: why did this happen? Why now? Why her? The simulation completed with a soft chime, no errors. Celeste closed the laptop slowly. She didn't smile, but she felt something shift. Not satisfaction, readiness, just then. The teenage boy beside her took off his headphones and glanced her way. "Hey, are you like a computer person?" Celeste turned to him, caught off guard. He shrugged. "Just saw your screen. Looked like code or something." She nodded once. "Yeah, you could say that." "Cool," he said, then pulled his hoodie up again. Celeste turned forward, and for the first time on that flight, exhaled without tension in her chest. The curtain ahead still swayed, still separated, but it was only a matter of time now. Systems do not change on their own. They are forced to reckon with themselves, and the reckoning had begun. Somewhere over the Atlantic, as the jet cruised quietly above the ocean. Celeste Ramsey sat in the row 31 with her laptop resting lightly on the tray table in front of her. The cabin lights were dim now, casting the space in muted hues of blue and gray. Most of the passengers had drifted into that half-sleep state where minds float but eyes remain closed. For Celeste, though, the night was alive with clarity. She was not tired. She was awake in the way only pressure could awaken a person. The way someone who had spent their entire life being overlooked, questioned, moved aside, learned to wake up with sharpness instead of softness. Her fingers tapped the keys gently, as if the rhythm itself was a meditation. She had returned to the system interface she had built just weeks before launching NeuroVault's pilot program. The event trigger module was never meant to be used outside of cyber defense training, but the moment she began tweaking the script tonight, it had taken on a new purpose. Not destruction, not revenge, just reflection. Reflection so bright, so precise, that a billion-dollar airline would have to look at itself. The code shimmered against the dark screen. Lines of logic that anticipated responses, delayed triggers, reversed outputs, elegant, safe, undetectable. It was beautiful in its restraint. Celeste paused and ran another simulation. Each aircraft identified by IP, altitude, and location, 12 planes, 3-minute signal freezes. Non-essential systems only. No risk. Only disruption. The test window confirmed success again. She had run this a dozen times in the past hour, each with perfect results. But still, she sat there, reviewing it over and over, because the weight of pressing execute was not technical. It was ethical. She thought again of her niece, Zora, 12 years old and already asking why teachers call on her less often than the other girls. She thought of her mother, who spent 22 years cleaning houses and still had to prove she belonged in her line at the bank. She thought of every moment when she had to smile through subtle erasure. She did not want chaos. She wanted a pause, a moment long enough for the world to feel what it meant to be silenced while standing in plain sight. A ripple, not a wave. Just enough to shift the air. She was still debating when the curtain moved again. This time, a voice came through with a different tone. "Excuse me, miss. Mind if I have a word?" Celeste looked up. A different flight attendant stood there. Younger, mid-20s, short natural curls tucked neatly into a bun. Her name tag read Ariana Clark. Her posture was composed, but her eyes held something deeper. Celeste gave a polite nod and closed her laptop gently. Ariana sat in the jump seat nearby and leaned slightly toward her, lowering her voice. "I saw what happened at the gate. And when they moved you?" Celeste looked at her without responding. Ariana continued, her voice measured. I want to say I'm sorry. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I froze. I've only been with Sterling for 6 months, and I didn't know if speaking up would make things worse." Celeste studied her, not judging, just listening. "I get it." Ariana looked surprised. "You do, I do," Celeste said, "but understand something. Silence does not keep you safe. It just keeps things the same." Ariana's shoulders dropped slightly. She nodded. "I know. I've been thinking about that all night." Celeste took a long breath. "What's your name?" "Ariana Clark. You want to stay in this industry, I do, but I want it to change too." "Then help me," Celeste said quietly. "Not with the past, with what happens next." Ariana blinked. "What are you going to do?" "Hold up a mirror." That answer seemed to land with weight. Ariana sat still for a moment, then finally nodded. "If you need me, I'll be here." She stood and stepped away. Celeste watched her go, then looked out the window. The stars above the Atlantic were soft pinpricks, scattered across the dark like silent witnesses. The moonlight touched the wing of the aircraft with a cold gleam. She whispered aloud, not realizing at first. "Hold up a mirror. That is all." Her hands returned to the keyboard. This time, she wasn't running another simulation. She was preparing the interface to connect with a private satellite node, a tool her team used to run latency tests for cross-continent data backups. It was her back door, not illegal, not known to anyone but her. The system pinged back. Access granted. 12 aircraft systems. Verified. The command console blinked. "Ready?" She didn't press enter. Not yet. Instead, she opened her notebook. In the margin, she began to write. Just 3 sentences. Not to send, not for social media, but to remember why. You can be powerful and still be unseen. You can speak clearly and still not be heard. But silence, even graceful silence, cannot save you. She tore the page from her notebook and folded it once, placing it into her coat pocket. Across the aisle, the man with cologne stirred and looked her way. "You ever sleep? Not on planes," she replied. He chuckled. "You should try it sometime. Makes the world quieter." Celeste gave a small smile. Sometimes quiet is the problem. He turned back toward the window. She faced forward, hands resting on the edge of the tray table. And in that moment, Celeste Ramsey felt it. Not rage, not vengeance, but control. She had spent her life being quiet in rooms where she had every right to speak. Not tonight. Tonight she would whisper to the sky, not to destroy, to wake it up. The cabin lights brightened slightly as the attendants prepared for the second service. Breakfast trays clinked. Coffee brewed somewhere in the galley. It was morning now in London, though still dark somewhere behind them over the ocean. Celeste Ramsey hadn't slept, but she didn't feel tired. She closed her laptop, slowly, quietly, and slid it into her satchel. The script was done, the mirror was built, and she was still deciding if the world was ready to look into it. Ariana Clark passed by, pausing briefly. Her eyes met Celeste's, and there was a silent exchange. Respect, concern, solidarity. Nothing needed to be said. A few rows ahead, Marissa Dane was busy handing out croissants and orange juice in her usual polished efficiency. She moved quickly between rows, stopping only to smile brightly when she reached certain passengers. First-class passengers, men with expensive watches, women in silk scarves. Every gesture from her had meaning, calculated, performed, and carefully distributed. Celeste knew the type, not just Marissa, but what she represented. It wasn't just about one boarding pass. It was about a lifetime of not being offered the champagne while others were handed it before even asking. Celeste remembered a trip to Zurich years ago. Her assistant, a white woman named Lauren, had traveled with her. When they arrived at the hotel, the concierge had turned to Lauren, assuming she was the one who had booked the penthouse suite. Lauren had laughed awkwardly and corrected him, but the damage had already been done. These little slights stacked like pebbles on the back until they weighed more than stone. Celeste adjusted the sleeves of her blazer and pulled out the folded note from her pocket. The one she had written just hours earlier. You can be powerful and still be unseen. You can speak clearly and still not be heard, but silence, even graceful silence, cannot save you. She read the words again. Then she folded the paper and tucked it into the lining of her laptop case like a promise. She wasn't angry. She was awake. The cart stopped near her row. Marissa stood over her once more, this time holding a tray with a plastic-wrapped bagel, a tiny fruit cup, and a lukewarm coffee. "Here you go," she said without looking Celeste in the eye. "Thank you," Celeste replied. Marissa said nothing in return. Celeste waited until she moved on, then glanced at the tray again. It was nothing, just food, but it symbolized so much. The distance between what was offered and what was denied. Meanwhile, up in first class, champagne flutes were still being topped off. Ariana had told her earlier, during a brief moment in the galley, that she had overheard a passenger ask why someone like Celeste would even buy a first-class ticket. The phrase had rolled around in Celeste's mind like a stone skipping across water. Someone like her. She knew exactly what that meant, and yet no one ever said it out loud. That was the trick. Discrimination in modern settings wasn't usually shouted. It was smiled, whispered, disguised in policy and procedure, wrapped in fake apologies. But even the best disguise left a trail if you were trained to look, and she was trained. Her entire life had been a kind of training. Celeste reached into her satchel and took out a small card. It was a personal thank you note she had received months ago from a cancer researcher in Denmark whose lab had been saved from a digital breach using NeuralVault's firewall. He had written in clear, sincere handwriting, "Your work protects lives, even when no one sees it. Thank you for seeing before others can." She had kept that card, not out of pride, but because it reminded her of her purpose. Not vengeance, vision. Behind her, a child began to cry softly. A parent hushed them with practiced calm. The world kept moving. Everything inside that cabin was so normal on the surface, but beneath it, layers pulsed. She wondered how many people on this flight carried invisible weights, quiet griefs, fears, or fury they dared not express. That's what made this moment matter, because sometimes it only took one decision to start an unraveling. Celeste picked up her phone and tapped a secure app that her tech team used for internal test dispatches. It was connected to their sandbox environment, which mirrored global networks for safety simulations. What she was about to run would ping airline servers not just Sterling's, but 12 of the most used commercial systems connected to the global booking database, a 3-minute mirror, 12 reflections, and the only sign would be a flicker, a sudden loss of gate connection, frozen check-in kiosks, canceled boarding passes, a hiccup, nothing dangerous, but unforgettable. Celeste hesitated. Then, slowly, she locked the app again. Not yet. There was something else she needed first. She reached for her phone's camera and opened the lens. She turned it toward herself not to take a selfie, but to see herself as she was, tired, focused, human. She recorded a short message, not to be posted, just for her archive, for memory, for testimony. If you are seeing this, it means I chose to make the system see me, not to crash it, not to hurt it, just to remind it that I am here. We are here. And we will not always walk quietly to row 31 when we paid for seat 2A. She ended the recording and saved it to an encrypted folder. That moment, to her, mattered more than pressing execute. That was the true statement. The code was just the echo. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A message from her lawyer, May Tanaka. We just got the final list of incident reports for Sterling. It's worse than we thought. Call when you land. Also, the whistleblower just reached out with receipts. Celeste's eyes sharpened. Receipts. She knew what that meant. Proof, not speculation, not whispers, logs, memos, email trails. Her hands trembled again, but not from fear, from purpose. The curtain swayed slightly as another passenger moved. She looked toward it. And this time, she did not feel small, she felt steady. Because somewhere inside a Sterling air server farm, records were about to speak louder than champagne flutes, and this time, someone would listen. The cabin lights dimmed again as the aircraft began its gentle descent over the English Channel. The captain's voice came over the speaker with that familiar calm, announcing their approach to London Heathrow. Celeste Ramsey looked out the window at the soft, sleepy clouds lit faintly from beneath by the city below. The same skyline she had landed in dozens of times before now seemed unfamiliar. Or maybe she was the one who had changed during the flight. She glanced down at her phone again. The last message from May Tanaka still glowed on the screen. The whistleblower just reached out, with receipts. Celeste knew May well enough to understand what that meant. May never used dramatic language. Receipts were always literal. Evidence, documented, clean. Celeste's heart began to race, not from panic but from precision. She opened the encrypted channel on her device, and within seconds, the message appeared. Sender Noah Franklin. Subject Urgent Internal Routing Protocol attached were 5 PDFs and a screen capture. She opened the first file. Her fingers froze. It was a scanned memo, dated 3 weeks ago, sent from the Regional Flight Operations Manager to Sterling Air's internal flagging system team. The memo instructed staff to run additional checks on passengers from high-risk categories. There was no official definition attached, but in the footnote, a supervisor had handwritten a clarification. High-risk solo travelers, no travel companions, African American women in luxury class, especially flights from New York, Atlanta, or Houston. Celeste's breath caught. There it was, not a mistake, not a system glitch, policy, unofficial, but real, handwritten bias that had crept into digital command. She opened the second document, an email chain between Marissa Dane and Thomas Kellen, dated just 3 days ago. Thomas had flagged Celeste's name as unusual for the cabin she booked. Marissa had replied with, I'll take care of it during boarding. We'll swap her quietly if needed. Let's not risk optics." Celeste closed her eyes for a moment. She could almost feel the weight of every microaggression she had ever endured collapsing inward all at once. They had not even seen her as a threat. Just a problem to avoid, an image to maintain. She opened the third file. It was a system log. Her seat, 2A, had been manually overridden. A second ticket, issued 15 minutes later under a preferred platinum member, the man in the tan coat, the one who had been escorted past her at the gate. They didn't just make a mistake, they sold her dignity. She opened the final image, a screen capture of an internal chat among several crew members. Marissa had sent a message moments before the flight, saying she's in row 31 now. Let her stew. These tech people always think money equals class. Celeste read the line 3 times. Then she slowly set her phone down on the tray table and stared straight ahead. Her pulse was steady. Her jaw was tight. She wasn't surprised, not entirely, but she was no longer wondering what to do. The mirror she had built on her laptop wasn't just necessary now, it was overdue. From across the cabin, Ariana Clark approached again. Her face looked slightly pale. Celeste nodded once, motioning for her to speak quietly. "I just heard from one of the staff up front," Ariana whispered. "There's some buzz going around. Apparently, someone flagged your profile at check-in as an outlier passenger." Celeste raised her eyebrows. Outlier. Ariana nodded. "They said it was for security reasons, but the pattern is always the same. Black woman, alone, first class, and it never happens to men." Celeste leaned back and let that word echo through her thoughts. Outlier, not citizen, not customer, not traveler, outlier. The word was poison dressed in professionalism. She looked up at Ariana. "Would you help me when we land, of course? I'll need a secure line to my legal team, and someone to hold the camera when I speak." Ariana blinked, then gave a quiet nod. "Anything else?" Celeste hesitated. "Yes, I need you to stay in uniform and keep your calm. What's coming? It won't be quiet." The flight dipped again, wheels lowering with a deep mechanical hum. Passengers stirred around them. Some opened window shades, others stretched their arms and rubbed their eyes. The world resumed its rhythm as if nothing had changed. But something had. The moment Celeste looked at those receipts, she understood that she was not the only one who had suffered quietly. She was just the one sitting in seat 31B today. But there had been dozens, hundreds maybe, all processed, all pushed back, all rationalized, not anymore. She reopened her laptop. The simulation panel blinked. 12 aircraft, live routing test enabled. She checked the safety thresholds once more. Power loads, redundancy, fail-safe timers. Everything had been reviewed again and again. This was not a system crash. This was a mirror activation. And in 3 minutes, 12 planes would experience a brief, unexplained disruption. Enough to trigger a scramble among airline executives. Enough to stop the boarding process at dozens of gates. Enough to start a question. What happened? And when they looked for the answer, they would find it waiting. In her voice, in her proof, in the evidence May would publish the moment Celeste gave the signal. Celeste placed her hand on the trackpad. She whispered something soft under her breath. It wasn't a line from any speech or book. It was what her father used to say when life got unfair. You don't shout through the storm. You become the lightning. And with that, She pressed enter. No alarms went off, no lights flickered in the cabin, but miles away, in 12 airport control towers, systems blinked, boarding scanners froze, digital kiosks rebooted, customer support dashboards locked, technicians swarmed, command centers pinged error codes they had never seen before. And as they did, Celeste sat quietly in her seat, pulling up the pre-recorded video from her encrypted folder. She tapped forward the message to May. Begin Phase 2. As the plane touched down and the wheels screeched against the tarmac, a new kind of turbulence had already begun. One not in the sky, but on the ground, where accountability was waiting. The landing was smooth. Not even a bump. As the plane taxied toward the terminal, there was a hush across the cabin, the kind of hush that only comes after a red-eye flight exhaustion mixed with expectation. Some passengers stirred and reached for their phones. Others stretched their arms overhead and rolled their shoulders. Celeste Ramsey remained still. She sat with her hands folded gently on top of her closed laptop. The quiet around her felt different now. Not the silence of dismissal, but the silence before a shift. The cabin doors stayed closed longer than usual. 5 minutes, then 10, an unusual delay for a first-class airline. A murmur of confusion rose near the front of the plane. Passengers glanced at each other, tapping on their screens, looking for answers. Celeste knew exactly why the delay was happening, because the mirror had started working. Sterling Air's network had been partially frozen. 12 planes had been disrupted simultaneously. Gate systems had reset. Mobile check-ins had failed. Internal messaging apps had gone dark. And somewhere in a control room, someone was sweating. Her phone buzzed. A secure message from May Tanaka. "We're live." Attached was a single press release. Celeste opened the document and read the first line. Ramsey Tech confirms breach in airline passenger equity protocol. CEO Celeste Ramsey issues formal statement and publishes evidence of systemic discrimination by Sterling Air. Her heart skipped just once. The statement continued with calm authority. No drama, no vengeance, just facts, logs, dates, names, receipts, a full breakdown of the manipulated boarding data, screenshots of the chat between Marissa Dane and Thomas Kellen, the memo classifying black women as high risk in first-class cabins, the override of Celeste's seat. It was all there. And at the center of it, the face of a woman who had refused to sit quietly in seat 31B. The press release was already gaining traction. Within the first 2 minutes, the post had been shared by several tech journalists and social justice advocates. Within 5, it had hit trending charts on multiple platforms. Ariana Clark returned to Celeste's row, her uniform slightly rumpled, her expression unreadable. "They just told us the jet bridge is malfunctioning," she said quietly. "But I think that's just what they're telling the other passengers." Celeste nodded. Ariana lowered her voice even further. "Security's on the way. Not police, just internal. Someone from corporate, too. Name's Granger. I think he's the big one." Celeste's lips barely moved. "Elliot Granger." Ariana nodded once. "He wasn't scheduled for this leg, but I heard someone say he rerouted mid-flight to intercept." Celeste looked down at her phone. Notifications were now flying in faster than she could process them. Hundreds of reposts, dozens of tags, emails from journalists, a voicemail from her PR team. She didn't need to open any of it yet. She had done what she came to do. She had spoken, in code, in clarity. A few rows ahead, Marissa Dane paced nervously. Her polished image had cracks now. Her hair was slightly out of place. Her smile had vanished. She kept glancing at the cockpit door, as if waiting for instructions or rescue. The door finally opened. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped into the cabin. Silver hair, square jaw, steely composure, Elliot Granger, CEO of Sterling Air. He walked with purpose, ignoring the murmurs of confused passengers. His eyes scanned the rows until they landed on Celeste. He approached slowly, then stopped at her seat. Ms. Ramsey. Celeste looked up. "Yes, may I have a word?" She nodded once. He gestured toward the galley in the back, away from the crowd. They walked slowly, the hum of whispers trailing them. Ariana followed discreetly, then stationed herself just out of earshot as a quiet witness. Inside the galley. Elliot folded his arms. "First, let me say this was never meant to happen." Celeste raised one brow. "Let me rephrase," he said quickly. "It should never have been allowed to happen. Better." He sighed. "This is not how we do things at Sterling." Celeste tilted her head. "Except it is. You just got caught." He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She stepped closer. "I have the documents, the chat logs, the override records, a flight attendant who offered to lie for her supervisor. And now, 12 planes grounded mid-process with no explanation. You built a system that let this happen, and you called it unfortunate instead of unacceptable." Elliot glanced around, voice lowered. "We'll make this right. I can issue a statement. Fire the staff, compensate you, upgrade your status permanently." Celeste stared at him for a long moment. "You still don't understand? Then help me understand." She took a breath. "This isn't about me getting an upgrade. This is about every black woman who paid full fare and still got less. Every teenager who saw a curtain and was told without words, 'Stay in your place.' Every mother who had to explain to her child why people looked through her instead of at her. I didn't build a company so I could be quietly pacified. I built it so people like me could be heard even when you're not listening." Elliot shifted uncomfortably. "I can't undo the culture overnight. No, but you can be honest about it." He hesitated. Celeste's voice softened. "Start with the truth. Admit what you let happen. Not just to me. To others. To the ones who didn't have press releases or backup teams or satellite relays." He looked down at his shoes. "If I do this, it will mean fallout. Then let it fall. The silence is already broken." Elliot looked up. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded. "I'll go on record." Celeste didn't smile, but she nodded. Back in the cabin, the jet bridge finally connected. Passengers began standing. The usual chaos resumed, overhead bins opening, coats grabbed, calls made. But a ripple of something else moved through the air. By the time Celeste stepped off the plane, her name had already been picked up by international outlets. Her video statement had been uploaded by May, and across terminals in 6 countries. Airline staff were staring at paused systems and starting to whisper. Who is she? What did she do? And how do we stop it from happening again? Celeste walked calmly down the ramp. Ariana followed behind her, eyes wide with quiet awe. Outside, a car was waiting. Her team had arranged it. A small black sedan, parked precisely on time. As Celeste stepped into the back seat, she took one last look at the plane. It was just a jet, but it had become something else. A stage, a confession, a turning point. She whispered to herself as the door closed, They offered me silence. I answered with signal. The Sterling Air Global Operations Center sat just outside of Dallas, Texas. From the outside, the building looked like any other modern office: steel beams, mirrored glass, manicured hedges, but inside, it pulsed with quiet urgency. Screens lined the walls, rows of desks faced massive dashboards, numbers flickered across global flight paths. Every light blinked like a heartbeat. This morning, though, something was off. Something had cracked the rhythm. Bethany Klein, Director of Network Coordination, stood at the center console staring at a screen that had turned gray and static. "That's the 12th plane," she said softly. "What is happening?" A young technician adjusted his headset and checked a third monitor. "It's not a breach, not exactly. The systems didn't shut down. They just paused, froze, all of them, exactly 3 minutes." She narrowed her eyes, and the timing synchronized, down to the second. Every jet linked to our primary reservation platform, one flight from each major region. Bethany tapped her finger against the table. "Did we get hit? I don't think so. There's no malware signature, no external intrusion. Then what is it?" The technician hesitated. "I think it was a signal, not an attack, a statement." She raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Look here." He pulled up a replay of the server logs. During the freeze, a series of shadow pings hit our terminals. No damage, no corruption, just interruption. But the source ID. He paused. It traces back to a node registered to Ramsey Tech. Bethany stared at the screen. "You mean Celeste Ramsey?" "Yes, ma'am. And she's already issued a public statement. You should see the trending page." Bethany grabbed her phone and opened the feed. The headline hit her square in the chest. "Black woman CEO denied first class." Then her phone froze. 12 planes in 3 minutes. She clicked through to the video. There was Celeste Ramsey standing outside a terminal gate, calm and composed. She spoke with quiet clarity. "I was moved to the back of a plane I paid full fare to sit in the front of. I was profiled, flagged, and minimized, not just as a customer, but as a woman of color. I will not let this be normalized, and, as of today, neither should you." Bethany set the phone down. Slowly, people were gathering around now. Analysts, IT leads, public affairs officers, a growing circle of urgency. "What do we do?" someone asked. Before Bethany could speak, another voice entered the room. "We respond." Everyone turned. Elliot Granger walked in, still in his charcoal suit, still visibly shaken from his overnight flight. He stood at the center of the control room like a man walking into his own reckoning. "We admit it happened. We admit it has happened before. We stopped pretending this was a one-time mistake." Bethany stepped forward. "Sir, the PR team is drafting a neutral statement. We can soften the blow." "No." Elliot's voice was firm. "We do not soften what was sharp. We do not clean what was dirty. We say the words out loud." The room was still. Then he turned to the technician. "You said it was a statement, not an attack. Why do you believe that?" "Because she could have done more. Ramsey Tech Systems have access to back-end aviation diagnostics. She knows how to shut things down. But she didn't." She paused us. "That was intentional?" Elliot nodded slowly. So she held up a mirror. "Yes, sir. Then we look into it." He turned to Bethany. "Schedule a press conference. No written statements. No PR spin. I'll speak myself." Bethany looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Elliot's jaw tightened. "I'm sure." Across the world, the fallout had already begun. News channels were leading with the story. Social media was ablaze. Passengers from other flights were sharing their own stories. Hashtags multiplied. 31B. Black and First. We See You people were no longer quiet. They were loud in their memories, loud in their pain, and loud in their calls for change. At that moment, in a quiet corner of London, Heathrow's business lounge, Celeste sat with Mae Tanaka and Ariana Clark. A laptop between them streamed the network coverage. Celeste barely spoke. She watched as anchors dissected every detail, watched as her video replayed with subtitles in 3 languages. "You changed the current," Mae whispered. Celeste shook her head. "I just revealed it." Ariana leaned in. "They're scared now, not just of you, but of everything they tried to ignore." Celeste looked at her. "Good, because fear is the first sign that truth is close." Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Noah Franklin. "More staff are coming forward. We're going to have enough data to expose the last 10 years of flagged bookings." Celeste exhaled. The mirror had cracked open something deeper than she expected. It was no longer about her seat. It was about every time someone was told to wait, every time dignity was delayed. She stood slowly. "I need a walk." Mae nodded. "Want company?" "No, just space." Celeste moved through the lounge, through the corridor of glass that overlooked the tarmac. Outside, planes moved in silence. But inside her, a storm was passing through. Not rage, not grief, something cleaner. Resolve. She walked until she reached the observation deck, leaned against the rail, let the wind touch her face. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stood there, still. This was not the end. It was only the echo, and it was traveling farther than she ever planned. The conference room was unusually quiet for a headquarters that often buzzed with the chaos of logistics, PR, and high-stakes scheduling. Elliot Granger stood alone at the front, looking down at the podium. In front of him sat 4 microphones, all live. Behind the cameras were dozens of reporters from global media outlets. His press secretary whispered a final reminder in his ear. He barely acknowledged her. He wasn't here to spin a narrative. He was here to admit one. The live stream clicked into gear. Across the world, millions tuned in. Some watched from phones while boarding planes. Others watched from living rooms, classrooms, hospital break rooms. Some with hope, others with doubt, many with pain. Elliot cleared his throat and stepped forward. "My name is Elliot Granger. I am the CEO of Sterling Air. I come to you today not to defend what happened, but to take full and direct responsibility for it. What occurred to Ms. Celeste Ramsey was not an isolated error. It was the result of a culture, one that has allowed silent systems to define worth by appearance, background, and bias. There was no IT failure, no ticketing glitch. The truth is simple. We profiled her. We moved her. We chose silence over accountability. And we got caught." He paused, breathing in. "I'm ashamed of that choice." Behind him, a giant display showed a scrolling timeline of internal decisions emails, policy memos, flight logs all released earlier that morning by Mae Tanaka and the Ramsey Tech legal team. No redactions, no disclaimers. Elliot continued. "Today, effective immediately, I have removed 5 members of my executive team." We are halting all boarding procedures on domestic routes for the next 4 hours to retrain staff and ensure no further misuse of our prioritization systems. We will no longer use language like high risk or outlier to quietly suppress black and brown travelers in premium cabins. This ends today, from the back of the room. Bethany Klein watched with her hands clasped tight. She had drafted many company statements in her career. None of them had sounded like this. Raw, unedited, uncomfortable, truthful. Elliot went on, "I've spoken directly with Ms. Ramsey. She did not ask for money. She did not demand fame. What she asked for was change, real change, measurable change. So that is what we will pursue. Starting now, we are launching a full equity audit of our airline systems, and we are inviting third-party observers to hold us accountable publicly." He stepped back for a moment. There was no applause, no dramatic swell of music, just silence, a silence that felt earned. He looked directly into the cameras. This is not about damage control. This is about culture control. And if I am not the right person to lead that change, I will step aside. The screen cut to black. In a coffee shop near Camden, Celeste watched from a corner table. Her phone was buzzing constantly, but she ignored it. May and Ariana sat across from her. No one said anything for a while. Then Ariana spoke first. He said the words. Celeste nodded slowly. He did. May was more skeptical. "Do you believe him?" Celeste turned her eyes toward the window. A family walked by outside, dragging rolling luggage, laughing together. A little girl with braids and a purple unicorn backpack looked up at the clouds and pointed excitedly. "I believe the system is listening," Celeste said. "Finally. And sometimes that's all you need to start a new pattern." May tapped her fingers lightly on the table. "We're getting hundreds of emails. Employees who want to speak out. Pilots, gate agents, even a few regional managers. Some of them were afraid before. Not anymore." Celeste's voice dropped. "Fear is a form of silence too, and it breaks like glass." She pulled her laptop closer and opened the encrypted dashboard where Noah Franklin had been uploading internal case reports. It was growing by the hour. Dozens of documented incidents, people like her, some more severe. One involved a family denied boarding entirely after being flagged by an unnamed supervisor. No refund, no apology. Celeste turned the screen toward May. "This isn't a chapter. It's a book." May nodded slowly. "And you just wrote the preface." From the far end of the cafe, a young man hesitated near the door. He looked unsure of himself, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands. Ariana noticed him and stood up gently. "Are you here to see Ms. Ramsey?" The man nodded. He was tall, early 20s, with large glasses and a nervous posture. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say something." Celeste smiled softly and motioned him over. He walked up slowly, placed the folded note on the table, and spoke with a trembling voice. "My mother was on Flight 26 to Chicago last month. She was seated in economy even though she paid for business class. She told me they said the upgrade system had a problem, but when she asked for help, the crew ignored her. I didn't believe her at first. I thought maybe she misunderstood, but then I saw your story, and now I know." He swallowed hard. "Thank you." He turned and left without another word. Celeste picked up the note and opened it. Inside was a picture of an older black woman, sitting alone at an airport gate with her hands folded and eyes lowered. On the back, a single line was written, She always told me dignity is the seat you carry with you. Celeste's throat tightened. She closed the photo gently and placed it into her satchel. They all sat still for a while, not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes silence speaks back, not to suppress, but to honor. The system had finally spoken, but this time it echoed with names, with stories, with weight. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Celeste Ramsey's hotel suite. The sky above London was unusually clear. From her view on the 15th floor, she could see the slow rhythm of the waking city, the early trains, the street vendors pulling carts into place, joggers tracing their routines through Hyde Park. Celeste sat alone by the window with a mug of tea, her phone silent beside her. She had not answered any calls since the press conference. The world was moving fast, but she was still, purposefully still. A knock at the door broke the quiet. May Tanaka entered, holding a tablet. "You need to see this." Celeste didn't move. May hesitated, then sat down beside her and turned the screen toward her. A new video had just gone viral. This one wasn't from Celeste. It wasn't from the airline either. It was from a former Sterling Air employee, a woman in her early 50s, wearing a navy blue blazer, seated at a small kitchen table. Her name was Dana Brooks. For 23 years, I worked as a flight attendant. I loved my job. I loved my passengers, but I saw things I wasn't proud of. I saw young black girls being asked if they could afford their seats. I saw mothers separated from their children because they were told they were randomly selected for extra screening. I saw passengers like Celeste Ramsey get downgraded and told it was a system error, and for too long, I said nothing because I thought I had to choose between feeding my family and telling the truth. Well, I'm done choosing because silence isn't neutral. It's permission. Celeste didn't blink. She just breathed. Another video followed, then another, former pilots, ground crew, reservation agents, people of every background, race, and rank, each of them telling one story, just one, not to attack, but to illuminate. It wasn't a leak, it was a flood, and it was unstoppable. May turned to Celeste. "You broke something open." Celeste shook her head slowly. It was already cracked. "I just put the light behind it." There was another knock. Ariana Clark stepped in, carrying a manila envelope. Her eyes were wide. "You need to see this." Celeste raised an eyebrow. "More confessions." "Not this time. It's from the Department of Transportation. I think it's official." Celeste took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a formal letter bearing the gold seal of the agency. She read it slowly, her expression unchanged. "Dear Ms. Ramsey, we are formally initiating a federal investigation into the prioritization and seating practices of Sterling Air and its affiliates, effective immediately. You will be invited to participate as a named consultant and advisor on matters of systemic bias in aviation. We believe your testimony, your documentation, and your expertise are essential to restore inequity and trust to the skies." Celeste folded the letter gently. May stared. "That's not just impact. That's history." Celeste placed the envelope on the table and stood, walking toward the glass again. "I didn't want this kind of history. I just wanted a seat I already paid for." She looked down at the streets below. So many people moving, unaware of the ripples happening above them. But maybe that's where change always starts. Invisible first, until it's undeniable. Later that afternoon, Celeste received an invitation. The CEO of Sterling Air, Elliot Granger, had requested her presence at a staff town hall being held at the airline's London headquarters. It was the first time such a meeting had been open to external guests, let alone the very woman whose story had ignited the crisis. Celeste didn't say yes right away. She needed to think. What would it mean to stand in that room? Would it be a performance, a gesture, or something real? That evening, as dusk painted the London skyline gold and blue, she arrived at the building. The lobby was crowded with staff, some in uniform, others in suits, a few still wearing security badges from other terminals. They watched her enter with a kind of quiet reverence, not like a celebrity, more like someone who had walked through the fire and come out with a map. The town hall was held in a large auditorium, no lights, no stage, just folding chairs, a microphone, and one man standing alone at the front, Elliot Granger. He didn't wear a suit this time, just a gray sweater and slacks, no tie, no press. He looked older than he had days ago, tired, but not defeated. When Celeste entered, the room shifted. All eyes turned. Elliot gestured to a chair beside him. She walked up calmly and took her seat. He waited for the quiet to settle, then spoke. "I invited Ms. Ramsey here because we owe her more than an apology. We owe her our attention." He turned toward her. "Would you speak?" Celeste didn't stand. She simply leaned forward and took the mic. "I never wanted to be here. Not in this way. Not as a symbol. I just wanted to travel like everyone else. I wanted to sit in the seat I booked. I wanted to sip my water, close my eyes, and land somewhere new without having to defend my presence." She looked out across the room. "But the truth is, many of you have known this for years. You saw it. You maybe even whispered about it in break rooms and late-night shifts, but you also thought it couldn't change. I'm here to tell you it can, but it won't unless you choose it. Not just the executives, not just the board. You, every one of you." Celeste let the words breathe in the space because the curtain didn't fall on its own. It fell because we finally stopped pretending there was nothing behind it. And the stories behind that curtain, they belong to people. People like me, people like you. She placed the mic down. Silence filled the auditorium, but it wasn't hollow. It was full of understanding, of reckoning, of possibility. One by one, staff began to stand, no clapping, no shouting, just standing, like a silent vow. Outside, the city pulsed on, but in that room, something had shifted again. Not a headline, not a protest, but a promise. The curtain had finally fallen, and what stood behind it was no longer hidden. The morning sun streamed softly through the windows of Celeste Ramsey's modest office at Ramsey Tech headquarters. The space was filled with sunlight and quiet hums of computers, printers, and the low murmur of voices from her small but dedicated team. The weight of the last several weeks still lingered in the air like a dense fog. But there was also a tangible lightness, a sense of momentum that hadn't existed before. Celeste stood at the window, watching the city wake. London had become both her battleground and her sanctuary. She took a deep breath, feeling the calm before what she knew would be a new storm. The phone buzzed on her desk. May Tanaka's name flashed across the screen. "It's time." May's text read, "The federal hearings are scheduled for next week." Celeste's fingers hovered above the screen. She felt the familiar flutter of anxiety, but also a quiet steel hardening inside her. She replied simply, "Ready." Later that afternoon, She gathered her core team in the secure conference room. The glass walls allowed sunlight to spill in, casting long shadows across the table. Michael Robinson, their chief engineer, sat beside Vanessa Martinez, their legal counsel. May and Ariana rounded out the group. Noah Franklin had flown in that morning, his expression serious but determined. Celeste addressed them with a calm authority. "We have a new mission. This isn't just about Sterling Air anymore. It's about every industry where silence has allowed bias to grow unchecked. Housing, healthcare, hiring, every system that was built to include, but somehow excludes." Michael nodded. "We've already begun work on a new AI system to detect and flag biased patterns automatically. Not just reactive, but proactive," Vanessa added. "Legally, we're preparing a framework that can hold companies accountable before damage is done. It's going to be a long road." May looked at Celeste, her eyes bright. "The hearings will put a spotlight on everything. We'll be in the national eye. We need to be prepared for pushback." Celeste's voice was steady. "We'll take it." Ariana smiled softly. "And I'll keep fighting from the inside." Celeste looked around the room, feeling the strength that had grown here quiet but unbreakable. That night, alone in her apartment, Celeste pulled out the letter from the Department of Transportation once again. She read it slowly, savoring the weight of the words. "You will be invited to participate as a named consultant and advisor on matters of systemic bias in aviation." It was more than a title. It was a call to shape the future. She thought back to that flight, the moments when she was pushed to the back, the cold looks, the stifling silence. She remembered the faces of those who had stood beside her in quiet support, and those who had turned away. But most of all, she thought of the seat she had always deserved, not because it was the front of the plane, but because dignity is a seat that cannot be taken. The next morning, Celeste arrived at the congressional hearing room. The marble columns and polished wood gleamed under soft lighting. Reporters, lobbyists, advocates, and officials filled the chamber. She felt the weight of the room, the history in its walls. When her name was called, she rose. She was calm, poised. She walked to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. The questions began, about her experience, about the evidence, about Ramsey Tech's role, about the future, and with each answer, she spoke not just for herself, but for the millions who had been silenced. She described how systemic bias in aviation was a reflection of broader societal patterns, how technology could be a tool to dismantle, not reinforce these barriers, how accountability was not punishment, but responsibility. At one point, a senator challenged her. "Is this not an overreach? Could this technology not be used to discriminate in new ways?" Celeste nodded thoughtfully. "Any tool can be misused, but that is why transparency and ethics must guide innovation. Technology without conscience is just another form of oppression." The room was silent. Later, outside the hearing room, journalists crowded around, cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward. Celeste answered questions with grace and strength. When asked about her future plans, she smiled. "This is just the beginning." Back at Ramsey Tech, the office buzzed with energy. The AI project was accelerating. Partnerships were forming. Invitations to speak at conferences arrived. But Celeste remained grounded. Her fight was not for fame or fortune. It was for the seat that dignity held. Days later, a small ceremony was held at the White House. Celeste stood quietly as she received an award recognizing her contributions to technology and civil rights, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor. She accepted it not for herself, but for every person who had been told they did not belong. And as she stood there, she knew the journey was far from over, because dignity is not a destination. It is a continuous fight, a seat that must be claimed again and again, no matter the odds, no matter the silence. The conference room at Ramsey Tech was filled with soft chatter and the glow of monitors displaying code and data flows. It was early morning, but the energy was electric. The team had gathered to celebrate a milestone, the official launch of the Equity AI system, a technology designed to detect and prevent racial bias in real time across industries. Celeste Ramsey stood quietly by the window, watching the sunrise over London. The light spilled over the cityscape, casting long golden shadows across the rooftops. It was a new day, not just for her company, but for a movement she had helped ignite. She turned away from the window and addressed her team. Today, we are not just launching software. We are launching accountability. We are changing the rules of engagement. No longer will systemic bias hide in the shadows of algorithms and unchecked policies. Her words were met with nods and smiles. There was a sense of purpose in the room that transcended business. They were building more than technology. They were building justice. Michael Robinson stepped forward, tapping the screen to display the final interface. The system would scan data sets for patterns of discrimination, flag suspicious activity, and generate transparent reports for stakeholders. It was designed not only for detection but for education, teaching companies where they needed to change before complaints arose. Vanessa Martinez added details about the legal framework accompanying the technology, emphasizing compliance and enforceability. May Tanaka outlined their outreach plan to industries most affected by systemic bias: aviation, housing, finance, healthcare. Ariana Clark, now leading a new diversity and inclusion initiative, stood beside Celeste with a quiet pride. She spoke about the human element, the importance of training, empathy, and ongoing dialogue. The room felt alive with hope. Later that day, Celeste received a call from the White House. Catherine Lewis from the Office of Science and Technology Policy had a proposal. The president wanted Celeste to lead a national task force on technology and equity, a chance to influence policy at the highest level. Celeste paused before accepting. It was a tremendous responsibility. The stakes were high, but she knew this was exactly where she was meant to be. In the weeks that followed, Ramsey Tech expanded rapidly. New offices opened in cities across the globe. Partnerships formed with universities and civil rights organizations. Media coverage highlighted their mission and successes. But amidst the growth, Celeste remained grounded. She often reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the humiliating moment at the gate to the disruptive power of her phone, to standing before Congress and the world. She remembered the countless stories shared by those who had been silenced. Their courage inspired her daily. One afternoon, as she prepared for a keynote speech at a major tech conference, she sat in her quiet office and opened an encrypted folder labeled Voices. Inside were hundreds of recorded testimonials, personal stories from individuals affected by discrimination in countless forms. Some shared pain, others hope. All were powerful. Celeste chose one at random and listened. A young black woman recounting her experience trying to book a flight. The agent's subtle questions, the feeling of being watched, the quiet judgment, the exhaustion of always proving her worth. Tears came to Celeste's eyes, not from sadness but from connection. She whispered to herself, "This is why we fight." Her phone rang. It was Ariana. "The plane you're taking tomorrow, first class, as it should be." Celeste smiled. "Thank you." That night, as she packed, she reflected on a simple truth she had learned along the way. Dignity is not a place on a plane. It's the courage to claim your seat, to speak your truth, to demand respect. No system can take that away unless you allow it. And sometimes the most profound changes come from the quietest seats, the ones occupied by those who refuse to be invisible. As she closed her suitcase and looked out the window at the city lights, Celeste knew her work was far from over, but she also knew something else. She was no longer alone. There was a new flight path ahead, one charted by courage, by justice, by hope, and this time she would not be the only one in the cockpit. Celeste Ramsey's story is a powerful reminder that dignity is not a privilege, it's a fundamental right. Her journey from silent humiliation to a bold challenge against systemic discrimination teaches us that courage and resilience can dismantle even the most entrenched barriers. But her fight is far from over. Every day, countless others face similar battles quietly, waiting for their voices to be heard. This story calls on us to recognize and condemn discrimination wherever it hides, whether in airline cabins, workplaces, or everyday encounters. It urges us to stand with those who refuse to be invisible and demand justice not just for themselves, but for everyone. If this story moved you, please like and share it to spread awareness. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about individuals standing up against injustice and sparking real change. Your support helps keep these voices alive. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, every act of courage creates ripples, and together we can rewrite the narrative toward a world where respect and equality are not the exception, but the rule